Some comic art can look powerful, while others can just look plain terrible. And the difference is not usually in the details, it's the control the artist has. Can the artist control where your eye goes on the page? Can they make the anatomy feel convincing enough for their particular style? Can they sell the emotion of that particular scene? Can they make the cover or panel communicate in just 1 second? Because that is the brutal thing when it comes to comic art. It doesn't matter how much rendering, muscle, texture, action, lighting, or attitude you throw onto the page. If the image is confusing, awkward, badly staged, or unclear, the viewer just feels it immediately. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at 3 different comic art examples that I think have serious problems, and 3 examples that show just how powerful and incredible comic art can be when the idea and composition and storytelling actually work. Now, I'm not dunking on any artist. The point is to understand what separates an image that has impact from an image that falls apart, because artists can learn from both. Now, let's start with probably one of the most infamous comic covers ever, Rob Liefeld's Captain America. Now, this cover, it gets mocked all the time, and you can instantly see why. Captain America's chest is just enormous. It's not just heroic, it's not just exaggerated. It becomes this huge inflated shape that just starts to overpower the rest of the character and scene. The shield is in front and the body's twisted and the torso is really pushed out, and the proportions are just so extreme that the figure, it just stops feeling powerful and starts feeling physically impossible. And that's the key difference. Stylization is not a problem. Comic art is built on exaggeration. Superheroes are not meant to look like normal people going to the supermarket. They are exaggerated myths with bigger bodies, sharper poses, stronger silhouettes, and just overall more attitude. But exaggeration, it still needs that structure. If you push anatomy too far without enough believable construction underneath it, the image, it just stops reading as heroic and just starts reading as just pure broken. That is what happens here. The intention is obvious. It's meant to be strong, patriotic, intense, just iconic Captain America. But the anatomy just becomes this thing everyone remembers. Not the emotion, not the pose, not the character. It's the chest. And when one accidental flaw becomes the focal point, the image is just lost all control. That is the lesson. If the viewer is staring at the wrong thing, the artwork is not doing its job. Now compare that to the next one, which is Frank Miller's cover of The Dark Knight Returns. This is almost the complete opposite approach. There is barely any detail. Batman is basically a silhouette. The background is simple. The lightning bolt does most of the compositional work, and yet it just hits immediately, and I love that. You know exactly where to look. You know exactly what the image feels like. It's violent, graphic, mythic, and just overall dramatic. Batman is not rendered with 1,000 tiny muscle lines. He just doesn't need to be. The silhouette does all the work, and the lightning just creates that energy. The empty space gives the image that scale, and the whole image, it just feels like a statement. And this is why this absolutely works, and it's one of my favourite comic book covers. It's not trying to impress you with how much is drawn, it is trying to make you feel something just instantly. It's a huge lesson that I think artists can take away from this. Power doesn't always come from adding more. Sometimes power comes from removing everything that just isn't needed in a piece. This cover, it just understands that Batman is a symbol in and of itself, so it treats him like one. And that is why it lasts. You can shrink the cover down and stare at it from across the room and just remember at it years later because it still works. It's still readable. It's not just a good drawing, it's just overall amazing design. Now let's move on to the next piece, which is a Wolverine cover by Pastour. I hope I'm saying that right. Now this one is interesting because I don't think the problem is a lack of skill. There's clearly ability here. There's the painting, there's the atmosphere, there's the texture, there's the weirdness of it, but as a Wolverine cover, I think it just fails in a really important way. It doesn't make the character feel strong, and for Wolverine, that is a huge problem. He has to be strong. The big creature in the background is the most memorable part of the image. Its mouth, its eyes, the shape, the scale of it, that is what pulls in your attention and what you first notice. Then Wolverine is underneath it, running forward, but his pose, it just feels completely awkward to me. The anatomy, it just feels off. The arms and claws, they don't have the aggression or rhythm you expect from this Wolverine character. And instead of feeling feral, dangerous and compact, he just feels just weightless. And that is a big issue because Wolverine is all about physicality. I mean, he's animalistic, full of rage, and he's just ready to explode. Here, the cover has a strange kind of dreamlike atmosphere, I feel. but it doesn't sell the core appeal of what Wolverine is. And that is where artists, they need to be careful when, I guess, working with IPs or developing their own unique, strong characters. An unusual style, it can be interesting, but it still has to serve the subject. If the style fights against what the character is supposed to feel like, the image, it just becomes confusing. And I guess this cover, it just feels like it just wants to be eerie and painterly, which is totally fine, but Wolverine still needs to feel like Wolverine. The claws should be dangerous, the pose should be loaded, like he's ready to go, the body should feel like it has momentum. The whole image, it should just make you think, like, I want to read what happens next. Instead, I'm mostly thinking about the giant weird creature behind him. The hierarchy is a bit off. The cover is letting the supporting idea kind of overpower the main character. Now compare that to Mike Del Mundo's cover of The Vision. This is one of those covers that proves comic art doesn't need to shout or be powerful. The whole image is just built around mood. Red just dominates everything in this cover. Figures are quiet, the composition pulls you into the center. Vision himself is surrounded, almost consumed by the color and the figures of Wanda, Scarlet Witch around him. There's not a huge action pose, it's not a fight scene, it's not a pile of effects, but the image instantly just feels emotional. You can just feel that and see it. It feels intense, it's got this intimate, quiet effect to it. It feels like something is wrong underneath the surface, and that is very hard to do well. The color is doing a lot of the storytelling. You instantly can just feel that emotion through the color itself. It creates pressure, it creates unease, it creates a sense of warmth and danger at the same time. And because the palette is so controlled, the small accents like in the face and the hands and the glow around it just matter more. That is just pure control. The artists, they're not given every element the same volume. The whole cover is saying, look here, feel this, stay in this mood. And that is why this kind of image can be stronger than something than 10 characters fighting on the cover. It has emotional clarity. That is something artists should pay attention to. A cover doesn't always need to explain the plot. Sometimes it needs to communicate the emotional temperature of the story itself. And this does that beautifully, and I love it. Now, let's talk about this Batman panel by David Yardin. This is a brutal action moment. Batman is hitting a wall or someone into a wall, there's blood, there's speed, there's impact, and the panel is clearly trying to feel violent and urgent. But I think this is a useful example of how action can become messy when the staging just isn't clear enough in the scene. The first issue is that the image is very close up and very aggressive, but the spatial read is just awkward. Batman's leaning in, punching the wall, the fist is buried in the impact point, the sound effect is there, the background is exploding with speed lines, and just everything screaming for attention all at once, which is one issue, because action needs clarity, but overall, what's drawing you in is the face itself. It's just so incredibly awkward in the over-exaggerated teeth and mouth, with the eyes even looking clearly visible through the mask. And I'm not sure if this is necessarily David's fault or the colorist's fault, because I think I read somewhere online that it may have been an issue in communication where the whites of the eye should have been, even though the mouth just seems so awkward, and that's just what you remember from this scene. It takes away the emotional impact of it altogether. So Batman's expression, it just loses this intenseness because this becomes comical, which is the last thing you want in an emotional, tense scene like this, because that emotional expression, it's a lot, and because it just doesn't read correctly, it just makes the whole panel fall apart. And this is what happens when you just completely mess up the emotional tenseness of the scene. Now, compare that to this next artist, which you may all know, Alex Ross, and one of my favorite covers by him, Batman Harley Quinn. Now, this is a completely different kind of power. It's theatrical, it's posed, it's almost like a poster or a stage performance, but it works because the image understands the relationship between these two characters. Joker's looming behind Harley, Harley is arched back with this glamorous danger, seduction kind of pose. The black background keeps everything focused, the title has breathing room, the figures are lit in a way that feels dramatic and iconic, and the whole image tells you what the dynamic is before you even read a single page. That is what a strong cover art piece does. It gives the emotional contract of the story, You don't need a complicated background. You don't need 6 scenes happening all at once. You don't need to explain everything in the cover. You need to make the viewer feel the relationship between these characters. And Alex Ross is obviously known for realism, but realism is not the only reason that it works. That is important. It's not good just because it's realistically painted. It's good because it's staged clearly. The shapes are readable, the value contrast is strong, the pose itself tells a story, the lighting supports the overall mood of the piece, the black background gives the figures authority, the whole image, it just has control. And that is what separates good realism from just copying a reference. Good realism, it still needs good design. It still needs hierarchy and it still needs a point of view. And this cover, I believe, has one. It's not just here's Harley and the Joker, it's here is their relationship. That is why it feels memorable. So when you look at these 6 examples all together, I think the lesson becomes pretty clear, in my opinion. Bad comic art, it's not always bad because the artist lacks skill necessarily. Sometimes it's bad because the image it loses control. The anatomy becomes distracting, the style fights the subject, the hierarchy points to the wrong thing. The action is just too cramped to read, the composition turns everything up so loudly that just nothing lands. And good comic art, it's not always good because it has the most detail necessarily. Sometimes it's good because it knows exactly what it's trying to do. For example, the Dark Knight Returns cover knows it needs Batman to feel mythic. The Vision cover, it knows it has to make you feel unease and intimacy. The Alex Ross cover, it knows it needs to tell a relationship and the mood of these characters. That is the difference. Strong comic art, it has a job. A cover has to make you want to pick up the book and read it and find out more about the story and characters. A panel has to move your eye through the story and convey the emotion. A pose, it has to communicate what the character is about and their mood and emotion. A composition has to decide what matters first in the overall hierarchy of the artwork. And if the artwork doesn't know its job, no amount of rendering will save it. That is the same lesson I keep coming back to in my own work, really. Detail matters, style matters, anatomy matters, rendering matters to an extent, but none of those things matter more than clarity. If the image doesn't communicate it, it just fails. It might still be impressive, it might still have effort put into it, but as comic art, it has to do more than just exist as a drawing, I believe. It has to tell, it has to guide, it has to sell the moment of the scene. So if you are an artist looking at these comic panels or comic covers, don't just ask yourself, is this well drawn? Ask better questions than that. Like, where does your eye go first? Where should it go? Does the pose make sense? Does the overall anatomy support the style? Does the background help or compete with every other element? Does the image communicate the emotion quickly? Would I remember this after looking at it and coming away? Will it stick in my head? That is how you start seeing the difference between art that just simply has stuff in it and art that actually works, really. And honestly, that is the part artists need to care more about. Not just drawing more, not just adding more detail or rendering harder, but making stronger decisions within the piece. Because the best comic art is not just drawn well, it's directed well. And the worst comic art, it usually falls apart when the image stops directing the viewer and it loses their attention. But let me know in the comments below, which of these examples do you think works the best and which one do you think fails the hardest? Let me know, and thank you for watching.